Hello again, a long time no see. Right, I think this is the part of the event you are all been waiting for. So we're gonna discuss the future of the Flutter framework. And however, before doing so, yes, come on, take your seats, please. I've been often asked, even during this event, before we jump into the proper topic of our discussion here, like. Uh, what's the support we can get from Google, right? And my answer is always that Flutter is not something that Google sells to the companies. It's something that Google builds and creates for the community. So the first question, Ander, for you, since like this is we can consider that an owned project by Google, however open sourced and given away to the people to use. Why do you even bother that the companies such as Virgin Money, such as Visman, Sennheiser, Nosh, or not to mention even LeanCode, are using Flutter? What brings you here? Why are you here with us, and why are you collecting all those stories?
Sure. So, when I look back at my journey with Flutter, and maybe taking a step back a little bit, I think the interesting I find about Flutter as a solution, as told by the initial founders in previous forums in the past years, and I think there's been a consistency in that. Flutter's origin started from like really trying to solve a problem from first principles. It started from, can we adapt at the time, as I understand the story as told, was could we adopt what was then a web specific framework and strip it down to some kernel somewhere that you can then adapt to, at the time, mobile, right? The very early versions of what mobile apps would be. And it basically became a strip it down to zero and had to start building from scratch from first principles. So from that perspective, it means that that tooling has really been an iterative form of what are real world things you need to solve for, what's really being built in the real world. And then for me as a product manager, I say for me it's about talking to actual people in the real world. We can all sit in a dark room somewhere only so long before it's not going to be too long until we're building something that isn't useful to anybody, which is not the goal of the project, or at least us as the Flutter team at Google actively want to build something that's really useful. And there's no other way we're going to do that besides actually talking to people building with this. It's one thing to build the thing, but building with the thing is a different thing. And at least I'm trying to make sure I'm intentional about recognizing that all the time.
Great. So I hope it was worth it to come here from San Francisco to see all those new interesting case studies and proofs that actually what the Flutter team is doing is valuable for the companies. And to that point, what the Flutter team is actually doing. We have an idea about that thanks to the roadmap, right? Because this is the roadmap is the tool that you use yearly to communicate your efforts. Can you tell us a bit the current roadmap? It's a snapshot of what you do. What pieces on those roadmap are elements of the long-term strategy, and where your major priorities are right now?
Sure. So maybe I'll talk a little bit first, a little bit of premise about at least how we think about what should we as the Flutter team at Google, which is part of, is by design from day one. It is an open source project. So our approach to it as well is like we are a team that's invested in it, and what are the areas we can and should focus on. So there are a couple of inputs that we take to that, which are again in the spirit of like actually getting input. We, as you all know, we consistently do a quarterly survey. We really do look at that every single time, and we look at the consistency of what's being with the feedback we're getting, where we're doing well, where we're not doing well. That's we really do that, and it's the reason we do it consistently. The other thing is a good signal that we use as a very concrete signal is issues, right? And sometimes we get a question about why is there a growing list of issues? Why are things not resolved? And fundamentally that we use that as actually as effectively a repository of what are the things that we should be working towards. So we really do look at that as an input. And then thirdly, with other ecosystem partners in the open source community who are building big pieces of the framework, the engine, etc. We want to be supportive of that. So when we then think about what should we work on in the roadmap, there are many things we want to do, but any team, we are very intentional about trying not to spread ourselves too thin, so we can actually bring things over the line. And then we focus on initiatives that are what are big, long-term, multi-year initiatives that perhaps only a team like us can set out to do, and then how can we enable the open source community to build on top of that. So those are some of the ways that we think about what should be in our roadmap. And of course, underlying that, there's all number of smaller things that bubble up as just specific features, etc. But that's how we set up the high level roadmap that we then publish for that reason, to say, here are the things after weighing all the trade-offs we believe we should invest in, and equally what we explicitly will not work on, and being transparent with that, because we know there's a demand for it, but we can't do it all, and we'd rather be upfront about that and say, this is what we will work on, this is what we'll not work on at this time.
Right, and you're right mentioning that spreading yourself too thin can be, in the long run, probably detrimental. So we are focusing on the major things that only you can do as a Flutter team. So if you can list those, in your opinion, key initiatives, like I believe many of you studied the roadmap yourself, but when you studied the annual roadmap in isolation from the previous years, you may not see the actual strategic goals and strategic challenges that you want to handle on your own.
Yes. So one big theme as well, especially as more and more enterprise and large-scale projects are being built on this, stability. We get that feedback. That's one recurrence themes of feedback quarterly, is essentially, don't break me every quarter. That's a message we get, right? And so we're at a point where that is not a reasonable thing to do. So you'll notice we're trying to be very intentional about not constantly shifting the goalposts on your tooling, on your framework, etc. Because that's just not tenable for somebody building at scale. So things like, and then you have things like, you'll see right at the top of our roadmap this year is accessibility, right? I think that's important wherever you're building. If you're, at the end of the day, what we're building, or what's built on what we build, is going to be used by humans. So you need to make sure you're catering to all the people who would possibly use that. So accessibility is a big thing we've been working on, especially now we're putting a big emphasis on that in web. Then we've got things like performance and scale. So a big initiative, we have performance, scale, and being able to truly take advantage of everything on the supported platforms. And one big initiative we're working on there is what we're calling direct native interop, as a next way of enabling teams to really, basically use any native APIs out of the box on day one. And a related initiative we needed to do that from a performance standpoint is, just getting into the weeds a little bit, but thread merging, which is all like very sort of big, low-level builds that we're doing, and we want to go deep and do those sorts of things to enable other people to then, API gets released today, you're able to use it on the supported platform. Some other things, so that's the performance-wise. We're also another big multi-year investment that we are continue to bring is Impeller, which you've heard of. So we've effectively built a whole graphics engine from the ground up over the past couple of years. We've gotten iOS now over the line, and we want to flip it to being the default for Android at some point. And then along that, we need to make some critical decisions. So, for example, we have an API cutoff for Android. We can't support. We found out we can't reasonably go and say we'll support every legacy Android device, just because they do not have the ability to run Impeller. So then being very intentional about this is the Android version you support, and then the other platforms will use X. Other things worth mentioning. The three main sort of target platform support areas this year, and that's been the case even last year as well, is again Android, iOS, and web. And they're continuing to make sure that all the latest versions of iOS, of Android, and the respective tool chains, so Xcode, etc., those need to be supported all the time. Other things, web, we're making big investments there, as you all seen. So WebAssembly was a big thing that we've been working on. On the theme of enabling others to contribute, desktop right now, a fair amount of that work is being done by Canonical at this point. So we want to see more of those instances, and it's being facilitated by a lot of investments we made in past years as well. Other things worth mentioning, evolving the programming, the language itself. So I've gotten some questions here today as well about things like, we made decision, I think earlier this year, to not do things like macros, but there are still very specific use cases where we want to solve, such as serialization. Deep serialization should be something that comes out of the box. So those are some of the things we're working on. And then developer experience-wise, which I know we'll get to that as well. I work a lot on the developer experience and tooling, and obviously AI and the intersection with AI-driven tooling is a big theme.
Exactly. And to that point, we've heard a couple minutes ago that the AI-assisted development revolution is unavoidable, and that was also the conclusion from our debate. So I believe you do have this annual roadmap that you publish. However, the pace of changes is simply somehow too quick for the annual roadmap to reflect the actual focus on what you do. So what do you do actively right now these days? What are your plans from the perspective of the Google Flutter team to support the idea of giving the superpowers to developers in terms of the tooling, in terms of Dart, in terms of Flutter?
Yeah, so I think the first thing that I'd ideally aspire to is to support every potential development environment you'd want to build, and of course that's a big ask, right? But as you all showed a little earlier, there's so many different tools now emerging, and they're all at different sort of at one extreme, coming from the quote unquote traditional developer lens, where it started as pure code suggestions, and at the other end, pure vibe coding, right? And I don't think those two worlds, they haven't yet, but we believe that these two worlds will ultimately, they need to merge somewhere. Meaning, anybody who is creating or building an app, and if that app is built with Flutter, regardless of what environment they're starting with, should ideally get the best of what they can from the framework. So one thing we're investing in is we're kind of, as we were looking at what was out there, this was last year, we were looking, what are all the tools out there? How do they work between GitHub Copilot and at the time Codium, which has evolved later on to Windsurf. And the big piece we kept missing is all of these could really do with a lot more context from the tooling we've already built as well. They don't have any connection at all. As good as they were, if you add this, we believe that'll 100x the effectiveness of them. Be able to generate, code that's higher quality on a more consistent basis, to adhere to design systems you might have. So we're always like, there's a layer missing. And fast forward to now, what looks to be the way things are going, that all the tools are adopting, is MCP, Model Context Protocol, because we were starting to get a lot of different AI-driven tools that were reaching out to us to say, hey, we would love to be able to plug into your tools. And we'd rather do that in some way that could work generically across all tools than build custom sort of pipelines for everything. So we're building an MCP tooling server, we call it. And we believe a good number of the AI, at least the leading AI platforms, are becoming what we call clients. And our vision is that in the coming months, they'll be able to plug into our tooling in that way.
Excellent. So that should be a huge enabler for developers to indeed accelerate with the coding here. So the MCP servers are right now on the top of our priority list, right, for this AI part of the roadmap. Are there any other elements that support further the AI's development process?
Oh yes, absolutely. So at the end of the day, this is just one. We think of it as part of an existing suite of tools. So for example, again, just keeping in the developer experience world, we're also working, for instance, right now, something we just released was things like the property editor, right, to make it easier to discover API surface, to be able to tweak visually. So there's still ultimately, and somebody mentioned earlier, these are all co-pilots, not actually driving things. How do we still provide tooling and services that you, as the lead developer, as the captain, so to speak, to be able to orchestrate all of these things? So we're still working on those elements. Another thing we're working on, for instance, is widget previews, which is something a long requested feature. Is hot reload is great, but it would be great if I could do this at a lower granularity, so I don't need to build my whole app. I want to test just my 5 different variants of this part of the UI. So we're working on that to build as another component. And then another space I think I'll talk about is, I talked about native interop as well. And then I think another big piece is the ecosystem, right? So a lot of the functionality and the reusable functionality that that makes for a good ecosystem, in our case, it's in pub. So that's another big thing we want to tie in, right? And at least from the last I checked, and that things are changing so fast, could have changed. I hadn't yet seen across any of the ecosystems any implementation of any of these tools actually being able to talk to the package ecosystem, pull that in, and how those interact. So something I think about it as well, because as much as we build a framework, we have 50,000 packages out there that are all the reusable components. You shouldn't need to rebuild all sorts of things. And then I know that there are a lot of companies that even have private package repositories. How do we enable you to plug into those sorts of things? And then lastly, there's the notion of agents, agentic building, right? So now, for example, from a Google perspective, there's things like Jewels that are coming out, which are supposed to do more sort of long-term, larger initiatives you delegate to. We're trying to work with teams that are building these to see how do we make sure that everything works together rather than being like disjoint.
Right. All of that seems exciting, right? But we've gathered today to exchange the views, to exchange opinions, exchange insights, and ask a lot of questions. So I would like now to open the floor for the questions from the audience to Ander, because I believe you definitely would like to use that chance with Flutter team representative here with us to ask about the future of Flutter, to ask about the roadmap, to ask about AI. So the questions are welcome. Łukasz. Let me moderate that discussion here. So I'll leave you for the moment because I don't expect the questions coming my direction.
This time not. I really think the idea of the MCP tooling server, as you mentioned it, is really interesting. Do you have any rough idea when it can be tried in, I don't know, any public beta or alpha version?
Technically, you can try it right now. It is out there. It's not. I think it's current in its current form. Where I'm working on with the team is, in the coming months, possibly weeks, have something that's easy to spin up in your ID of choice. So Cursor, for example, is the leading. They're already an MCP client, etc. So that's imminent. We already have. If you look at the GitHub repo, which is currently sitting in a, it's titled as experimental because we don't believe it's yet ready to build with. You'll be able. We have a number of tools that we've set up already, and functions, and those work today. So
nice, thanks.
Any further questions? Right.
You're right.
Oh, Miriam, sorry.
I was too proactive. I'm working at a company that recently did this big app rewrite in Flutter, and something that was not there or is not there but would have helped us a lot would be like the opposite of add to app. So actually, we've been like ready with 80% of the things, but there were those 20% of use cases left over that were actually hard to do. And we could have launched earlier if we had an easy way to integrate, bring back some ugly legacy into the Flutter app. Is there anything you can comment about something like this?
Yeah, maybe I'm going to first ask a question. How much of that would you say were essentially native APIs versus where it was actually features built in the native that you wanted to port in?
Mostly features.
Okay, so mostly features. Yeah, I think there's definitely room there. Because add to app is both ways, to your point. There's a variant of add to app that of course, it's add Flutter features into an existing native app, but you're talking the inverse of that, right? Where there's understandably use cases that you'd want to bring features you already have there into the Flutter app. Yeah, I'll say it's not where it needs to be for those kinds of use cases. In fact, we were having discussions just yesterday. I think there's an opportunity to build there, and we have a roadmap item we've not yet been able to actively work on. That was really supposed to look at the whole add to app spaces in both directions for that very reason. But yes, I think there's a lot of work we want to do there.
Thanks.
Right. I said this add to app territory is always the source of the questions. Right.
Hello. So my question mainly concerns the Flutter web. So we know the Flutter for the mobile is performant, winning by a mile over the other solutions that we have. But there are some concerns over on the internet, either in Reddit or in developer forums, that are claiming that the Flutter web is being a little bit marginalized and is not as performant as the other native solutions that we have. So my question for you is this: how true is that? And are there any plans for the future to make it friendlier and make it that developers accept it more as they accept the Flutter mobile?
Yeah, it's web is an interesting one, and Kevin Moore, my fellow PM, is the one who has the most context. But from what I'd say is, one thing we have tried to be more intentional about is at least the intent of Flutter Web is not necessarily, it's not meant to be a one-to-one replacement for any other web framework. That was, I think, at some point in the past a thought, but I think we've come to a point where it's actually, we think Flutter Web is suitable for certain use cases and not every use case that web could possibly serve. So I think there's some nuance there in that. So for example, a recurrent one that comes up is SEO, right? I think it was 2 years ago. That's why we flipped a little bit of emphasis to really go more to the embedded model, meaning if you can rather embed specific Flutter web elements in a broader web canvas, if you will. So that's where I'll leave it there. It's like I think we and maybe we can do a better job about communicating clearly about what we think the use cases Flutter Web is best placed for, and it's more explicit perhaps about if you have needs that are Y, better to use another framework or a hybrid. That's another option, right?
Thank you.
Yeah.
To add to that point as well, because it's all about use cases, and even in our Flutter CTO report, you can find an interview exactly with Kevin. So about the communication of your efforts and where you can find the best approach for the Flutter for Web. Kevin explained directly what Flutter for Web is and what is the target application where it's most suitable for. So indeed, the cases that Ander mentioned that take into account SEO are excluded, but there's a clear vision that it should operate in an environment where there's this single page application case when you are after certain login authorization, different ways getting an access to the actual app, and you operate with the data, interact with the data there, then I guess all those cases are perfect for the Flutter for Web. So it is there. It is being used heavily these days. We were even, because we do see a lot of examples of Flutter for Web that we can create LeanCode, but we were actually even surprised to see that close to 70% of the teams that are using Flutter declare that they are also using it for the Flutter for Web. So the Flutter for Web is there, and new features that were announced during the recent I/O, like hot reload for web, are also already there. So it's especially since the last year when the WASM compatibility was announced, also during I/O, things are really smooth for the Flutter for Web. Right. Any more questions?
As I mostly work with Flutter Web on a daily basis, I can see that by looking at the current roadmap, the most important issues with the usability of Flutter Web apps are constantly being addressed, like performance, loading times, etc. So the last big issue that could help bring the framework to a little bit more mainstream web developers is essentially not having Flutter web apps penalized by Google when they are indexed for search. Considering that Flutter web apps are rendered completely differently, the navigation is not standard when you compare it to regular web pages. Is there any way for Google to actually step in and implement some sort of a new app website indexing model that would help with actually indexing regular web apps, single page applications, websites, blogs, or everything built with Flutter? Because the performance gap is no longer such an issue, and the actual tooling for building even regular websites with Flutter is great. So the last big issue for me is actually on Google's side when it comes to indexing those sites for search.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, and I think that the challenge there is it's premised on that whole ecosystem defining a whole new way of what search indexing looks like. So I don't know enough about that world to be able to opine, but that's an interesting perspective I'd like to learn more about. If you're saying that, it meets every other need. I wonder though, I'd love to chat with you a little bit more about whether there's some middle ground between, yes, your Flutter web app, but could you wrap that in an indexable app?
You don't necessarily have to wrap it. There could be a simple way for the app to actually generate some sort of a metadata that can, in a new format that can be quickly consumed by search engines. Without even have maybe to manually load all those apps and start indexing them as they will run on the device.
Got it. Yeah, that's an interesting idea. I'm happy to kind of take it and bounce it to Kevin and see if that's what we would possibly be able to do to help with that.
Another question, Christian?
Thank you. And based on your question, Ander, what is the strategy in terms of, or basically what I understood in the past, web apps were meant as web apps. And there were a lot of complaints about SEO capabilities of Flutter. Has this changed? Is there a demand of creating really web pages in Flutter in the community, or?
Yeah, and I think that's really at the crux of this, which is why what we're saying, we try to be a lot more intentional about what Flutter is intended to serve. And no, that has not changed in at least how and what we're prioritizing in terms of building Flutter web is not meant to tackle that at this point. Yeah, that has not changed from a product build perspective. But I think the recurring theme is it seems like there's still an open question. So maybe it's communication or getting the word out clearer or more specific, explicit recommendations or sometimes showing is better than telling. Maybe we need to have sample apps that show what this looks like rather than tell.
Okay.
That's what I'm thinking.
Thanks.
Right. Any more questions?
Hello. I'd like to ask a question which is follow-up to add to app feature. Do you plan to add some built-in support to develop the home widgets?
The home widget?
Yes, the widgets that are deployed on the desktop of the device.
Oh, okay. I know there have been in the past, at least on iOS, if I recall correctly, and I don't know the latest status of it, but I do believe the team does look at that, and I think there's something for iOS. I don't know whether it meets the need the need you're talking about right now for home widgets, because I remember a couple of years ago we showed a demo of it actually. So I'd like to understand more of what's missing there. Yeah.
Right. Any more questions? No? Probably. Oh, yes. We've got time for the last one. Right.
Thank you. Yeah, Ander, I asked you that question, but
Yes.
maybe it's good to ask it and to get
Yeah,
the
just
answer for the
repeat it so
audience.
everybody has it as well. That's a good question.
Yeah, okay, then I'll try to phrase it again. So Flutter is great, and it's very comfortable to build application on that. I can say, from my perspective, being a team lead involved. But what is important for us, at least for our company, but I guess for many other companies, is to see what is a Google direction in Flutter for the future. So do you see Flutter as a default, let's say, a framework for all of the future, or let's say for some number of future mobile applications in Google? And do you think that you will continue investing into that, let's say, in 5 years period? Or you see Flutter as a solution that Google is using for mobile applications, and if the solution doesn't work, it maybe in some point on time you will decide and go to move to something else?
Yeah. So what? Sure. Yeah.
Yep,
Yeah.
thank
So
you.
the first thing that is maybe not obvious from outside Google is the choice to use Flutter by any given team at Google is independently made in the same way that you will make it. So, and maybe that's not as obvious, meaning it's not a given that that Flutter is sort of the go-to, right? So we build, and for instance, as we think about how we build, it's not premised on this team at Google's needs. It's based on, and as a mark of, are we doing this well? Are we building a framework that anybody can use, including Google Teams, seriously considering it? So all the teams you saw up there, I can say, did their own evaluations and went through their own journey similar to what you mentioned, including building prototypes in different, native and other flavors, and made a decision on Flutter of their own accord. So we take that as just another signal of, are we doing the right thing, in the same way that you all in this room are. So in other words, we could have, I almost picture like some of these seats with other Google teams equally asking us the hard questions, and they ask us the hard questions, believe me. So yeah, how we work as the Flutter team at Google is not driven by any specific Google application need. Right, we do it more from, are we doing something that even a Google or any other large company, of which there are others, some in this room, would consider the framework, and that's the mark of success. So I don't, as a product manager, I talk to all my customers, not just Google.
And to support that point, I can tell you the anecdote about one of the app being developed by Google. So that was a Google Cloud admin app that was actually built in Poland by the Polish Google team, and at some point in time we were approached with some questions, like and for some advice. We were asked, so indeed this is true what you are saying, that all those teams are independent in their choices, and probably they can now the knowledge also spreads internally among the Google teams, right? And it's easier for them to gather the experience inside, but initially they were also looking for the knowledge externally, and that was pretty also funny for us. Right, good. I think we have no more questions here for this fireside chat discussion. So, Ander, thank you very much for being patient and answering them all here. Thank you for all great questions. I hope that if you had any doubts or issues, now you have at least a transparent opinion on why certain things are the way they are, and what can you expect about the future of Flutter. Right, so Ander, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you all so much. I mean, obviously, to be clear, I came here with the objective of learning, because anything we do is about context. So I would love to continue these conversations. I want to learn more about what you all are trying to do, so that as we think about these things, we have the context and can kind of do the right thing and figure out how we partner with the ecosystem to help you all as well and other people build. So thank you.